it's Micah. Welcome to the latest edition of the Sounding Board. This week we discuss who invented country music. Last week I focused on all the uproar about Beyonce recording a country song, and the upshot of that discussion was, of course, she has the right. She's a musical artist. Why shouldn't she do it? But in the discussions, not on my video, but in the discussions of other people reacting to Beyonce or giving opinions on Beyonce's foray into country music, the same sentence kept popping up from different people, and they kept saying this over and over. And the sentence was, "Black people invented country music." Made me start thinking, well, let's ask the question: who invented country music? I mean, I guess a better question might be, does it matter? But I think I can answer that pretty quickly. Yes, it does matter. We don't teach history in schools for someone to come along after we have a whole semester of learning and then say, who cares? History is a recording of who did what. And so, yes, it does matter who invented country music. I think I can pretty much put that to bed right away. Yes, it does matter. Now, in what context does it matter? Like, what are the implications of that knowledge? That's where we get into all the messy stuff. But it is worth a discussion, because at no point in these online discussions have I seen anyone counter someone or challenge anyone once they make that statement. I thought that a good way to approach this would be to actually not reinvent the wheel, and to look at an article that someone has already written about this exact subject. In so doing, I hope to provide the exposition around this pithy, punchy one-line statement, which is, black people invented country music. Is that an oversimplification? I believe it is. But we all are aware of the tight, short attention spans of people online, and once you start over explaining something, which I'm really great at, then you lose people's interest. So a lot of times you kind of have to get the gist of the message out there instead of going into all the nuances of it. So I think if you'll bear with me, this article, which is about a 7-minute read, really provides the exposition around what people should mean when they say black people invented country music. There's some people who just parrot it and don't necessarily even know what they're talking about. But for anyone who is well versed in the history, this exposition in this article that I found online is probably a really great, for me, it's a great starting point. So I'm going to defer to this article. Let's flip to it right now. I'm going to provide a link to this article in the video description, so you can read it in full for yourself. This is from a campus newspaper, Skidmore News, from Skidmore College in New York. I'm not overly familiar with the school. I assume this is a student editorial. It's written, and to me, at the level of a professional publication editorial, and it seems to be pretty well researched. I found the article engaging and informative, and it really does kind of get right at the meat of the question of who invented country music and why is that important. So this was written by Zia Foxhall, and like I said, I'm going to link to the article in the comments if you want to read it, get the page some views, get this, I assume it's a young lady, give her, this, it's a 2-year-old article, so give her some recognition, give her some views, and I wanted to, put this out here, because I think rather than me, like I said, recreating the wheel, here it is all laid out for you. So I'm going to read parts of this off, because I doubt that you can see this on your screen, but this is the cogent parts of the article that I think bear some discussion. So This is, again, full attribution here. These are Zia Foxhall's words and not mine. So, opening is, if you picture a stereotypical country music band, you might call to mind a crew of musicians playing the banjo, a mandolin, the fiddle, maybe the harmonica, perhaps a pedal steel guitar, and someone on mic with a twangy southern accent. While the specifics of your band may vary here or there, whether you realized it or not, your imaginary country band is most likely white. It is incontestable that the country music scene is a white space. The vast majority of top charting country singers now and throughout history are and have been white. Even for those who have a limited knowledge of country music, artists like Johnny Cash, Tim McGraw, and Carrie Underwood still come to the public mind, their commonality being whiteness. Of the 146 members of the Country Music Hall of Fame, only 3 African Americans have ever been inducted, the first being Charley Pride in the year 2000. There has been little uproar about this fact. Most people have happily, perhaps unconsciously, digested the idea that country music is for white people. As consumers of the music industry in America, we let them have it. In reality, just like most popular music genres, country music in the U.S. began with black people. More specifically, the story of country begins with the banjo. The modern-day banjo is a descendant of a West African instrument made from gourds called the akanting. When enslaved persons were taken from Africa to America, their instruments came with them. For 400 years, enslaved people created their own music, hymns, spirituals, and field songs, all with roots in African music. Accordingly, in the 1840s, the banjo was seen as an exclusively black instrument. It was unheard of for a white person to play the banjo. Now, from here I'm going to paraphrase a bit because who wants to hear me reading? The next step in the progression is minstrel shows. And this is where we really get to the bottleneck in the intersectionality of the racism and the oppression and the suppression of the music as a black music form. Minstrel shows, in case you don't know the history of it, were incredibly racist entertainment vehicles where white people parodied black people. Part of that parody was incorporating their instruments, which included the banjo. So country music started off as a joke, more or less. And then from there, white people came to embrace the banjo unironically as a way of expressing their own existing music traditions. Now, the one thing I will say in this article, there's not really an overt acknowledgement that white people even had any musical traditions of their own, and that's where the question kind of comes up for me when someone says black people invented country music. You say, well, really? Is that exactly true? But more on that after I get through going through this article. From there, it went to hillbilly music, which before World War I was an uncommercial, more or less grassroots phenomenon where musicians, both white and black, collaborated on records and made music together in a lot of cases, and of course in some cases separately. So it was more or less an integrated music space in a very non-integrated society. Then after World War I, the music industry took off with the introduction of the phonograph, of course, and from there, country music began to be marketed as white music. And as the article says, music is shaped by those who market it, make it, and consume it. For decades since, and this is where I left off in my paraphrase, country music has been documented by white artists, marketed by a white industry, performing to white audiences. But the black artists that have been the foundation in making country music what it is today cannot be forgotten. To name a few, DeFord Bailey was one of the first black musicians to gain recognition and the first to play the Grand Ole Opry. His harmonica playing style greatly influenced the country musicians that followed him. Succeeding Bailey was Charley Pride. To me, this sounds like a pretty big skip, because I don't think Charley Pride chronologically comes right after DeFord Bailey, but I'm not an expert on this. It's just in my head with the way I'm thinking about it. I think there may be a little bit of a skip there. And then the article mentions Ray Charles and also Gus Cannon and Leslie Riddle, who pioneered a guitar finger picking style that is uh, common to country music today. So there's a lot of influence there from black artists. And then the article mentions the difficulties that Lil Nas X had with Old Town Road being accepted as a country song, and Beyonce with Daddy Lessons, um, which unfortunately she misspells as Daddy's Lessons, and the backlash that Beyonce faced there. Um, so there's been backlash against black artists trying to do any form of country music. It's it was quite easy for me to understand why there was backlash against Old Town Road. It was a tongue-in-cheek song from an unproven artist who just came up out of Atlanta. I think it was intended as a tongue-in-cheek song, almost parodying country music. So I don't, I kind of get the backlash on that song, but I think country music should have enough of a sense of humor, since that's one of its trademarks in the first place, that it should have welcomed it onto its airwaves. But of course, it didn't. But the Daddy Lessons debacle was not so easily explained away. That was a great country song, and it got rejected at every turn from being considered a country song and for it being accepted in any way into the canon of country music. So I'll then now read off the conclusion of the article. It says country often gets dismissed as being simply and superficially about getting drunk, driving the truck, or a scorned lover digging her key into the side of his pretty little souped up four-wheel drive. Still, another common theme of country music is to tell the story of the hardships of life. Even Johnny Cash's most popular song is titled Hurt. But what is overlooked by white Americans is that hardship is the core of the black experience in the United States, feeding into the soul of country music, hence why the two are inextricably linked. Due to the fact that country music would not exist without the black experience and the overlooked yet tireless work of black musicians, it is crucial to advocate for and legitimize black history. Black people are a central target of the United States' oppressive structures, constantly told that so many pieces of American culture are not for them. Both basic needs like healthy, low-cost food, proper education. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. I'm making a very important point, Amir, and you're in the way of my text. Darn kitty. Both basic needs like healthy, low-cost food, proper education, housing, affordable health care, but also the expressive disciplines that black people have greatly contributed to, like the arts, music, dance, entertainment, and so on, are often viewed as white domain. In reality, American culture was built off the backs of black people. It's time to properly recognize the history, give credit where it is due, and support black country artists. That's an impassioned and really well expressed sentiment. Of course, for people who do not share the social worldview of this author, it's going to be difficult to take in any of that. There's this blocking mechanism whenever you talk about social justice for a lot of people, and it's just not ever going to get through to them. And that's where they are. So I'm not going to bash that. I'm just going to say that I agree with this. And I think that's really what it's about. This is when people say that black people invented country music, they're not saying necessarily that. Some people are, but those people are just parroting things. But people who know anything about music, anything at all about music, know that that's not how music works. Music isn't some mad scientist musician in a laboratory working for hours on end, day after day, and then busting out of his laboratory and saying, look, I created a music genre. It's a collaborative social effort with different influences coming from different places. There are exceptions. I know very little about reggae, but I will say that if there ever was a single origin point for a music genre, reggae is probably the cleanest story you'll find on that, with Bob Marley. But again, I don't know a lot about reggae, so I could even be off the mark there. But undoubtedly, his music came from somewhere as well. Everybody's music comes from somewhere, and it's never as clear cut as being able to attribute it to one particular group of people. But that's not really the point. The point is to say that the instrumentation, the the stylistic choices, the historical foundations, so much of this is based in the Black experience that it feels wrong not to say to some extent that country music is foundationally from Black people. At least a major part of it is. Like I said, we live in a short attention span culture, and it's hard to get across a nuanced point. So some people accept that as a given and will say things in very absolute terms, such as Black people invented country music. That's unfortunate on one level, but it's also a necessary corrective to what other people think or say about country music, which is that it only belongs to white people, or the more coded way of saying it is it only belongs to patriotic, true Americans, which is to say conservatively inclined Americans who don't believe in any sort of world engagement or social engagement at all, and all that goes along with that. So, I think it's important to make the distinction from a historical standpoint that there are lots of European traditions that are part of country music. That is true. And if everyone had the time and the space to digest the nuances, that would be part of the discussion. And I do wish that people would be more careful in their phrasing of their positions, so as to not unnecessarily anger people who are already feeling alienated by this position. Now, I understand nobody's here to babysit the feelings or the social positions of people who are racist or who don't want to listen to facts. But at the same time, if your point is to create dialogue, starting off the dialogue with a statement like that a lot of people will automatically shut out and reject, is not going to accomplish that goal. So I am not 100% on board with phrasing it that way, but I do understand what is meant when people say, oh, Black people invented country music. So that's my overall position on that. Now, taking a step back, I wholeheartedly agree with the gist of this article. However, I think it's an important lesson that you can't believe everything you read on the internet, even something that's presented in a admirably dispassionate way like this article is. It definitely has a viewpoint and a social viewpoint and advocates for a position, but it doesn't do so in an unprofessional way. It doesn't do so in an overly emotional way. It's a good piece of student journalism, but it does show you how even something that appears to be really well documented and researched can spread misinformation. The thing that bothers me when I read a book or read an article, and I'm not an expert on 90% of what the author is telling me. They're giving me information and I'm having to say, okay, well, that sounds right. But on the 10% of the article where I do have some knowledge of what they're talking about, I have a bone to pick with them. That makes me a little uneasy. And so, although this article, I think the gist of it is correct, the fact that the parts of the article where I do have as much knowledge as the author, or perhaps more, gives me pause because I've found things that are wrong. So that makes me wonder, the parts of the article that I don't know for sure, are those really correct? Did she transfer that knowledge correctly to me? Because some parts of it she did, unfortunately, transmit incorrectly. and they're nitpicky things, and probably the most glaring errors were was that last paragraph where she quotes a big chunk of Carrie Underwood's song "Before He Cheats," and then she mentions hardships of life, and then she says Johnny Cash's most popular song is titled "Hurt." So there's issues with both of those statements. First, instead of talking about revenge stories being a caricature of what country music is really about and what it's really like, I think it would be more productive to talk about how it's a real part of country music, and it links the country tradition with the blues tradition and the R&B tradition. Roughly contemporaneous with Carrie Underwood's song was a song on the R&B charts by Jasmine Sullivan called "Bust Your Windows," which of course is talking about busting the windows out of the car of her ex-lover. Those songs are very parallel to each other in the two different genres. I think it's more helpful to talk about how there are commonalities in that music rather than dismissing it as a misguided trope about what country music is supposedly really about. The second thing is a little more substantive, a little more objectively wrong. Johnny Cash's most popular song for people under 40 might be "Hurt" because it's the only song that he had a music video for that played on MTV. But Johnny Cash had 14 number one country songs starting in the 50s and going through the 70s. He had over 100 singles. He had over 80 country top 40 hits in his career, and "Hurt" wasn't one of them. "Hurt" stalled in the 50s on the country music chart. It was just a song that was released shortly before he died and got a lot of media attention. And on top of that, it's a Nine Inch Nails song. So using that as the example here was actually a pretty big fail. It's the one owie in the article that I feel like could have gone through a little bit better fact checking. And I take the time to point out those errors because I really, it's really important that people understand that just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. Even something as well presented, and even from an overall viewpoint, from the standpoint of its overall viewpoint, is a correct analysis of the subject at hand, it can still have inaccuracies. So, beware of those types of things. I mean, I've even, like on my other videos, I've even said things, especially on my Janet Jackson videos, where I'm like, oh, I'm the fan, I can just spout off this stuff, and I've had people correct me, and I'm like, crap, I thought I knew that. Well, I guess I just assumed it all this time. And that's how misinformation gets spread. It's not always intentional. It's not always malicious, and sometimes it's not necessarily so far off from the truth. But you think about how often we rely on things that we hear on the internet. It's really hearsay in a lot of cases, and sometimes it's even presented in the form of objective facts in a very serious editorial essay like this, and it's just wrong. So that would be my secondary point here. So that's my thoughts on it. I mean, am I being too nitpicky in any way with anything that I'm saying here? Let me know in the comments. I think overall this is a great discussion for us to be having in society. No one really talks about music from a philosophical standpoint. And one of the reasons why Beyonce is such an important musical figure is because she provokes these types of discussions. She provoked the discussion about how we market music when she came out with the Beyonce album in 2013. And with the Renaissance Project, she, of course, thrust LGBTQ influences on popular culture into the spotlight. And now she's doing the same with country. So, again, let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate you listening, hanging out, and hearing me out on this. I want to thank Zia, who I do not know her, but I want to thank her anyway for this incisive article that from a couple years ago that really gave me a good foundation for doing this video. Please be sure to visit that link and read the whole article for yourself, and like this video if you indeed liked it. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this, and my plan is to do a video like this once a week, and most of my other videos are going to be reaction videos of songs, and I'm also doing a series on all of the Taylor Swift albums currently, speaking of country music. And finally, please continue through these types of discussions, please continue to help me to make music better. Thank you.